Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Air with Brian Gregory, live from Fort Worth, Texas, on this beautiful Wednesday night. We should have Luke hopping on here in a few minutes, but we are prepared to go with just a solo show if that's what we have to do. We always have a contingency plan with The Air. It's part what makes us great here. But if Luke comes on, we'll add him in. If not, we are ready to roll here. We're talking Ole Miss and Oregon tonight. Two programs that a lot of us have a lot of questions about. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to both teams. They're not as sure of shots as they were last year, but they're still fantastic programs, and you certainly can't count them out. We should have reasonably high expectations for both teams. So let's start in Oxford's with the mighty Ole Miss Rebels. So this is a team last year that you want to talk expectations. We all had expectations up to the ceiling for Ole Miss last year. It was college football playoff, even CFP semifinal or bust for Ole Miss last year. I mean, you look at that roster, you had Jackson Dart, Walter Nolan, Trey Harris, Juice Watkins. Like, this team was absolutely stacked. They went 9-3. They lost to Kentucky. And so I had that same kind of sinking feeling that I had with the Detroit Lions last year. It kind of felt like the window shut. But that's what I feel as a fan. If you're within the walls of the Ole Miss organization, you have to be thinking, okay, last year was rough. It sucked. We fell below expectations. But how do we move forward? How do we navigate for the future here? And I think that Ole Miss has done a pretty reasonable job at that. They've been prepared for Jackson Dart's departure. They had Austin Simmons sitting behind him the entire time, the southpaw. And it speaks miles, not only in the NFL, but in college. When you have a quarterback sitting behind an experienced veteran guy like Jackson Dart, who's developed over these past several years, you can learn so much from somebody like that. And the transition is more seamless than if you're a freshman just starting for the first time, being thrown to the wolves, thrown to the fire. Austin Simmons has had that time to sit behind Jackson Dart and develop and mature. And for nothing but great things about Austin Simmons. I mean, he's a very accurate quarterback. He's a very poised quarterback. And from what we saw out of him last year in the minimal playing time that he had, he looked promising. But we just saw a little sample size, kind of like Arch Manning. Little sample size. Rebel fans went crazy, just like Longhorn fans went crazy when they saw Arch Manning. But it was just a small sample size. Nonetheless, I like what we saw out of Austin Simmons, and I'm optimistic for Ole Miss's future with him this year. Now, when you're a quarterback, you know the saying, you're only as good as your receiving core. Well, Ole Miss went into the portal as they do and added Harrison Wallace III from Penn State and Deshaun Stribling. And they also have Caden Lee, who I think is ready to hit the ground running this year. Those are three pretty reliable targets for Austin Simmons. So really talented receiving room for Ole Miss. And Logan Diggs, the transfer from LSU, has been at Ole Miss for a little bit. It's time for him to step up and elevate now. It is now his time to capitalize. A lot of Ole Miss's defense is reworked, especially the secondary. And this is something that I always talk about when it comes to either unit, offense or defense, the transfer portal. When most of your unit is made up of transfers, how does it affect the quality on the field? Now, it can either go one way or the other. I mean, you've seen some units, some wide receiver units get put together and guys just mesh. They just get each other. Or they're really talented and it just takes off. And then you'll see some offensive lines or some secondaries be patched together guys from the transfer, and there's just no chemistry. There's just no cohesion. Most of Ole Miss's cornerbacks and safeties, they're from the transfer portal. Now, granted, they're guys that came to the SIP. And so they were really talented where they came from. They were very productive where they came from, or else Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss's staff would not have gone after them. But you're not going to know the quality of this unit until you see them play together for the first time. And you can only simulate it so much in spring ball and in fall camp and in summer practice. But until you see it in a game, you're not going to know. We saw this out of LSU back in 2023. And that's what held them back a lot, if I'm being honest. That was when you had Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, had all those guys, Mason Taylor still there. Fantastic year for LSU's offense, and I think you can have a very promising offense out of Ole Miss this year, given that receiving core and running back room. Ole Miss's offensive line looks pretty decent as well, but I'm concerned about that secondary. Is this going to be a 2023 LSU-like team where you have a high-octane offense, but you're having to score 30, 35 points to win? Well, let's pick a Miami from last year. You don't know until you see that secondary play together in live game action for the first time. On a positive note for Ole Miss's defense, they still have TJ Daugherty and Suntrine Perkins, who were very productive. A lot of sacks, a lot of tackles last year. These are two dogs that are still on Ole Miss's defense. And so I can't wait to see them come back this year. It's just guaranteed production. It's like when you saw Dallas Turner, Terrion Arnold return to Alabama back in 2023. You knew what you were going to get out of it. And you already know that these guys are going to have very productive years this year. So Ole Miss's defense will be hard-hitting, but I'm a little concerned about the secondary and how many points that they're going to yield. Now let's look at Ole Miss's over-under win total. And again, I like to rely on FanDuel when it comes to these. The schedule starts off really easy, and then it gets quite tougher as they get to host LSU this year, but it's a much improved LSU team on paper than it was last year. They have to go on the road at Georgia, at Oklahoma, which neither of those two games are going to be easy at all. Having to go to Sanford Stadium, play the Dogs, having to go up to Norman, play Oklahoma. Oklahoma's going to be a much better team than they were last year. And they get the Florida Gators early in the season, I must say, in early September at home. So it'll be interesting. Actually, I may have messed that up. I think it's slated. I was thinking about LSU for a second. My mind was on LSU for a second. But yes, Ole Miss plays Florida at home this year. It's an easy schedule. It gets gradually harder. And so considering all those factors, I think that Ole Miss wins 8 to 10 games. It's slightly worse than last year. Their roster is slightly worse than it was last year. However, it's still competitive. I think they'll still be in the SEC hunt late into the season. 8 to 10 wins sounds reasonable. Probably more on the low end of that because it's tough to see them going to Georgia. I think Georgia gets their revenge last year. Ole Miss lost to Florida last year. Granted, that was on the road. They get them at the Grove this year. And then playing LSU. I mean, that rivalry is back and forth between Ole Miss and LSU, so it's kind of like flip a coin with those two. But I think LSU is the better team this year. I'm feeling 8-4, 9-3 again for the Rebs this year. That's my take. And I love Ole Miss. Oxford is one of my favorite places to go, and I want to see them perform very well. It's just going to be more of an uphill battle this year than it was last year. Now, let's turn the page, go all the way from the southeast to the opposite corner of the country, the Northwest, the Big Ten. Let's talk about those mighty Ducks of Oregon. And so I wanted to talk about these two in the same episode because, like Ole Miss, Oregon is transitioning with a new quarterback this year as well. They're bringing Dante Moore, and I know that a lot of you all know him from UCLA. Saw a little bit of action The stats weren't great. They weren't eye-popping, but he showed some promise. And just like Austin Simmons, Dante Moore got some time behind an experienced quarterback who went to the NFL in Dylan Gabriel. And so that's great again for his development, for his maturity. It's more of a plug and chug than it is throwing him into the wolves. And like Austin Simmons, I've heard nothing but very positive things about Dante Moore. He's been a dog in practice out in Eugene. A lot of the receivers are really impressed. A lot of the offensive staff, analysts, have been really impressed. And so, really good things for the Ducks as far as their outlook for their quarterback goes. Now, let's look at Oregon's receiving core and the composition of that. Now, of course, you had Trayshawn Holden leave. He's not in Oregon anymore. Tez Johnson's gone now. TJ Ferguson's gone now. However, there's still promise. While Casper Kyler and Gary Bryant Jr. are inexperienced, you have an absolute freak in Decorian Moore in Oregon. And now he's a guy that's going to be like, maybe not quite to the level of a Ryan Williams or a Jeremiah Smith. You never want to put that kind of pressure on somebody. But he's one of those 5-star dogs that are just ready to go, that are just plug and chug. When are you ready? Just put him in. And I think that he's one of those guys, instant success. You're going to see him put up numbers instantly. Route running is amazing. His speed is amazing. The separation he gets is amazing. He's just a natural receiver, natural first rounder. So can't wait to see what we're going to get out of Decorian Moore this year. And that's huge for a transfer quarterback like Dante Moore. Kind of like Will Howard in Ohio State last year, having Jeremiah Smith there. I mean, it just brings your game as a quarterback from one level to the next. People looked at Will Howard differently at the end of the season than they did at the beginning. I think you're going to see the same with Dante Moore this year. I think that connection is going to be there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Casper Kyler or Gary Bryant Jr. elevate as well. I don't think that that's unfair to assume. There's no more Jordan James either. And so Oregon at the surface right now doesn't have as much firepower on offense as they did last year. But this is also an extremely deep Oregon team. Like I said, there's only a few other teams that are as deep as Oregon in college football. It's your Texases, your Ohio States, your Alabamas, your Georgias. They're on that level. So the guys that were behind the aforementioned names, Jordan James, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, they're dogs as well. And so have no fear about that depth. Now, kind of like Ole Miss as well, there's a unit on Oregon that I'm a little bit concerned about. It's their offensive line. It's mostly transfers. And so, again, offensive line, a lot of people forget about how crucial chemistry is on an offensive line. It's not 5 sumo wrestlers, 5, 310-pound guys out prevent your quarterback from getting hit. That's what we see on a Saturday afternoon, on a Sunday night. But on that field, it comes down to chemistry. And so when your entire offensive line is rebuilt, it's a question mark. And while a leaky secondary is a concern, you got to score a lot of points to make up for that. A faulty offensive line can fuck up the entire flow of your offense. And so if these guys gel together, this can be another highly productive Oregon offense. And you get a good year out of Casper Kyler, Gary Bryant Jr. This could be a very good year offensively for Oregon. But if some of those things go awry, this could be a team that relies a little bit more on its defense than it did last year. And I use that as a bridge, I use that as a transition to say that Oregon's defense, it's scary. Because while you had some guys like Derek Harmon go to the NFL, this defense is still nasty. You still got Bryce Botcher there. You still got Mattia Wingalale there. I hope I got that right. Same last name as DJ. You still got Tatum Tawudi there. Those are three guys that were very impressive statistically last year and really held it down on defense for Oregon. Very physical. I expect to see the same thing out of them this year. Oregon was very hard hitting. I mean, the only team that I really saw stick it to them was Ohio State in that Rose Bowl and Penn State in the second half of the Big Ten championship. I think Oregon got a little comfortable and took their foot off the gas there. This is a scary Oregon defense. And you've got a Will Stein offense, too. I mean, yes, is there some turnover? Yeah. But it's a Will Stein offense with a promising quarterback and a freak freshman phenom wide receiver. I like to look at this team. Now, that's what it looks like at the surface. Let's evaluate Vegas's view on Oregon. This over-under win total really popped off the page, I think. 10.5 wins for the Ducks this year. That's what FanDuel is saying. I was a little surprised. I was expecting to see maybe 9.5. But then when I did my research on Oregon's schedule, the toughest game that they have is on the road at Penn State. And I don't want to downplay that because that's a really tough game. But outside of that, Oregon's schedule is really manageable. They've got a couple fluff games early on as well to tune up before going into that Penn State game. And so they do play Oklahoma State early on. That'll be a challenge. They play USC later in the season. But outside of that, really manageable stuff for the Oregon Ducks. And so at first, just looking at how much of this team is reworked, especially on the offensive side of the ball, I was hesitant to say 10 wins and agree with that over-under win total. But then when I looked at that schedule, I was like, yeah, how does this team not win 10 games? And so that's where I'm going for the mighty Oregon Ducks this year is 10 to 11 wins. I think Ole Miss misses the playoff, but I think Oregon makes it again. I think that you could very well see an Oregon-Ohio State Big Ten championship. Oregon is going to be one of those teams this year. I don't think they're nearly as good as they were last year. At least I don't think so. Just looking at the surface right now, looking at what they have on paper, I don't think they're as good as what they were last year. Some guys, some units could gel. That would be great. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. However, because of their schedule, half of this thing is schedule. Look at SMU last year. Look at Indiana last year. They're good teams, but they were able to elevate and have the season that they had because their schedule was on their side. And it's the same thing. Oregon has luck on their side. Luck is a lady to Oregon this year when it comes to their schedule. And so it's going to put them in a great position late in the season to compete. And I think they could go on a little run because health is wealth late in the season. Health is everything. I mean, if you're going into a postseason, you have to go through a grueling schedule. You guys are physically in better shape than everybody else, and you can make a deeper run. So the schedule works in Oregon's favor. It works with them step by step. And I think it's a promising year for Oregon. 10 to 11 wins, 10-2, or 11-1. I'd like to know what y'all think about Oregon and how many games they win and what their ceiling is, what their floor is for this year. But I think if you're an Oregon fan up in Eugene, Oregon, it's time to be excited. I mean, the program is in a very good place right now, as is Ole Miss. Is this a little recalibration year for the Rebs? Absolutely. But Ole Miss is still in a very good spot as well. So that's pretty much all that I had. I was expecting to have Luke on here, and so him and I would be having that conversation back and forth. But I was prepared to talk about those two teams today, Ole Miss and Oregon. I'd like to know what y'all think about Ole Miss and Oregon, how they do this year. Drop your take in the comment section below. But both fan bases should be very optimistic. This Sunday, I should be having Zeke Wager on to talk some NFL. We'll disclose later in the week the two teams that we'll be talking about, but we'll keep you all posted. But for now, thank you all for hopping on here. I really appreciate the time that you took to watch this episode and your support as always. Have a great day.